stop thinking it's inaccessible. The fact that user engagement signals power, your rankings and your outcome means that everything that it's going to take to get a good outcome is within your control. So stop praying to the Google gods and start focusing on driving better user engagement metrics.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Confessions of a B2B Marketer podcast. And have I got a special episode for you today? We're joined by Nick Jordan, who is the founder and CEO of ContentDistribution.com and Cluster.ai. This is a SEO agency and a piece of SEO software that has been spun out of the agency. The growth is very good. We break down exactly how they get significant SEO results for their clients. And then we go into how he's built the agency and how he's building and growing the software. You're going to love it. Before we jump in, I have to give a shout out to Omega Draco, who says, as an avid user of Tom's SaaS platform Bcast, hearing him speak in a straightforward and entrepreneurial approach, giving valuable insight and guiding startups to success is priceless. Thank you so much. If you have any feedback on the show, please go to Apple, leave a rating and review, and I'll get you a shout out on this show. One final thing, of course, you're probably aware this podcast is now sponsored by Ahrefs Webmaster Tools. The product is insane. It's basically my homepage at the moment, or has been for the last 6 months. I use it to do three things. First is track when we get new backlinks. That is an amazing feeling. The second is to understand if there's any issues with the Fame or Bcast site. And then the third is obviously adding keywords into the tool to see how we are performing. All of those three things you can get 100% for free. You simply Google Ahrefs Webmaster Tools. You go to the landing page. You will be able to get those three features for absolutely free. I highly recommend you do that, even if you're using some other SEO tool, because it's free and because it's the best on the market. So with that, let's now jump into this discussion with Nick. We're going to break down their approach to SEO, how he's grown the agency, and his approach to marketing the B2B agency and B2B SaaS product. Let's go. So Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much. I've been looking forward to it all week.
So let's start off first by understanding something you just said before we started recording, actually, which was get a good outcome from SEO. You don't necessarily have to be super serious about it. So could you first elaborate on that? And then I'd like to ask you about SEO that you think most people disagree with. And it may actually be the same thing you already mentioned, but please elaborate.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to give your audience the hook to listen to the next 30 minutes because I'm going to talk about how we've grown 4 projects from 0 to 100,000 organics a month without building backlinks or doing technical things. Google doesn't work the way that you think it does. And I think everything that you know about SEO could be a lie. So sorry, what was the question specifically?
The first question is, you mentioned before we started recording why it's possible to get a good outcome from SEO without being super serious about it. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's 2021 and Google doesn't use backlinks as a primary ranking signal anymore. They use user engagement metrics like time on site, pages visited, bounce rate, and overall site engagement. And when you think about it, it would be pretty crazy if the world's most innovative big data company that also owned Google Analytics, Android, and Chrome wasn't using that data to determine which page adds more value to a user than another page.
So I actually think this caveats nicely into the next question I want to ask, and that is, what should most B2B marketers stop doing regarding SEO?
Stop thinking it's inaccessible. The fact that user engagement signals power, your rankings and your outcome means that everything that it's going to take to get a good outcome is within your control. So stop praying to the Google gods and start focusing on driving better user engagement metrics.
So when you say user engagement, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I can start to construct the post in a way such that it's going to entice someone to read all the way to the end. Or I can put some little mini widgets on the page that people have to click to expand images, etc. Is that what you're talking about?
One of the easiest ways to increase the time on site and the number of pages visited is to write more words. You have more opportunities for internal links, which will drive people to other areas on your website. Mm-hmm. And there's just more content to read. it really comes down our strategy. And by the way, we've taken 4 projects from 0 to 100K, but our biggest is 0 to 479,000, again, without building new backlinks. And our approach is that every page of content that we publish should be higher quality than any other page Google could show. And I think it really comes down to quality drives those user engagement metrics, and Google measures quality with the metrics.
Okay, so to summarize the first 5 minutes of this interview, SEO is easier than you think. You shouldn't spend all your time trying to hustle for backlinks, and you should make sure the content is as good as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. One more thing, you want to scale up content production because you can't rank for a group of keywords until you have a page about that group of keywords. And when you're thinking about SaaS products, I feel like one of the largest challenge SaaS products have is their great offerings with no awareness or consideration. And so the opportunity to get in front of your target audience isn't a couple keywords at the bottom of the funnel. It's keywords, it's hundreds and hundreds of unique pages of content all across the funnel.
Got it. Now, scaling up, let's dig into scaling up content production, because I have actually learned some stuff from you have a blog post on this. And you're essentially saying, because one of these really important points is that the quality of the content is so good, this places important on the cost and quality of the writers you can hire or bring into your team. Could you share more about how you're finding these good writers for low cost?
Yeah, definitely. So content is expensive because the people that are good enough to write good content, they could get paid to do their job. So you're going to have to be competitive there. What I found where we have the best experience with B2B writers is approaching nomad communities on Facebook groups. And what we see is there's a lot of talented people there who haven't quite made it yet, but they're pretty good at what they do. So they don't have enough deal flow. And so they're willing to create content instead of doing the marketing thing or the B2B thing that they really like to do.
Presumably, if they're in different lower cost countries, they charge lower rates.
That's correct. Yeah. I'm out here in Thailand right now, and there's a lot of nomads here in Bali that are not meeting their financial goals.
The requirement to have a writer sitting in the same office as you is like so far away from reality now, I think. Maybe a year ago, people would be like, yeah, you need your content team like sat next to the CMO. But right now, it's just ridiculous to believe that.
I talk to 50-person B2B companies that don't have dedicated content writing roles. To bring in a full-time content writer that sits in your office from Seattle. So that content writer needs to get paid $85,000 per year. And if scale is an important quality of crushing organic, then the lower my cost, the more content I can push for the same budget. I think because of how many unique opportunities there are to get in front of a SaaS customer, I think content costs is a huge competitive advantage. If I can create 500 pages of content for, let's say, $50,000 or whatever, I'll have twice as much surface area as the guy who's paying twice as much.
I think it's quite interesting how you describe that as surface area, because it basically is happening, right? If you have a blog with 40 posts, you can think about that as almost a tree, and the trunk is the /blog URL, and then you have this surface area of the tree spreading out. And so if you have 40 versus 400, obviously the 400 has a greater branch span and or surface area. So I like that analogy. But Nicholas, I want to go back and ask you about engagement again, because I feel like this is a big thing. This is a big opportunity, and you only gave us one way to increase engagement. So are there other things that you're doing or that you recommend clients do boost time on page or the other metrics that you think are so crucial?
Yeah. So the user engagement metrics that are considered good are, it's highly dependent on a keyword that you're trying to rank for. And so there's no like absolute scale of what's a good bounce rate or what's a bad bounce rate. It's simply in the context of the other pages that Google could show. So people are always like, hey, Nick, what should I do? And I say, go look at the first page of search results. Go open up each page that's ranking in a new tab, and then set out to create a better piece of content that Google could show for the keywords you want to rank for. And so that means it's more comprehensive. It has more H2s. It has more pictures. It has more words. It has more internal links. It has more external links. Just go all out and try and beat everybody and everything.
Sure. So there isn't necessarily one set of things or one thing you can do. It's really a holistic approach to creating better content.
Yeah. And I think your audience is smart and they just need a framework for approaching it, and they'll be able to fill in the little tiny details.
Sure. Okay, let's try and make this a little bit more specific and actionable then. So you've mentioned these 4 to 5 case studies where you've taken people from nothing to 100K or 400K organic sessions. Could you choose one? I don't mind which one. And can you just break down like how you started, what you did, and then more details on the results?
Yeah, why don't we talk about, there's, I think, 2 B2B ones I can talk about. They're a little bit smaller. They're less ambitious, but it was the same strategy and they got a pretty decent result. Are you familiar with a brand called AnyLeads?
Not now.
So AnyLeads is like a lead generation tool that like does cold emails, does some stuff on LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, when people think, especially non-SEOs, they think about SEO, they're like, oh, I want to rank for like LinkedIn automation or cold email outreach. But really, there's the way that people evaluate products is they don't consider every possible product in the category. They just pick a couple that they're familiar with. Maybe their friends recommended, maybe they found the brand on a Google search, and it's where I focus. And if you look at something like AnyLeads that does some LinkedIn automation, the person that would probably buy that LinkedIn automation is probably also searching for LinkedIn profile examples, and LinkedIn headline examples, and LinkedIn in-mail examples, and searches that indicate they're trying to use their LinkedIn profile to grow their business or grow their network or something of that capacity.
Yep.
Does that make sense on how basically it's less ranking at the bottom of the funnel is important, but if your whole strategy is dependent on those 1 or 2 landing pages and those 1 or 2 landing pages don't rank, your SEO campaign is delivering no value. But if you go all across the funnel and try and be everywhere your target audience is looking, you take a lot of shots on target. If your implementation is good, you'll rank more often than not, and you can touch people everywhere they look.
So to clarify, here the term or the target audience is defined by the willingness someone is showing to use their LinkedIn profile to grow their business. And so any term that shows that someone is trying to do this, for example, in-mail examples, though it might not be further down the funnel, e.g. it doesn't show they definitely want the use of LinkedIn automation, it shows that they could be someone who would use LinkedIn automation and therefore it's worth creating content around that term.
Exactly. Basically, everyone who's using LinkedIn automation is looking to grow their business on LinkedIn. And so if you're also looking to grow your business on LinkedIn, there's a good chance that you might be interested in LinkedIn automation.
Makes sense. So here's the first step someone needs to take before embarking on any SEO campaign is who are the people that could buy our thing and what are the keywords that show that that's the right person?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like another great example is I was working on this. It's kind of like an influencer platform, but it's for brand ambassadors. So people who are already your existing customer. And they were like, yeah, I want to rank for brand ambassador software. But when we looked at the opportunity, there's all these other ways that brands that want to run brand ambassador campaigns are searching for how to start a brand ambassador campaign. They're searching for brand ambassador contracts. They're searching for top fitness brand ambassadors because they're trying to get intel on their competitors. And if we just focused on that bottom of the funnel, it converts the highest, but we'd probably lose out on 75% of our conversions because the top is just so much broader.
Got it. So it's almost like this is the most important part, right? Because once you have those keywords that are slightly higher at the funnel and we know the person searching for them would potentially buy, the rest is basically create amazing content for those keywords, right? That's basically it. But I want you, if possible, to break that down a little bit more. E.g., where did you find the writer for this or writers for this project? And then was there anything else you did before publishing the content and then anything else you did after publishing the content to get the results?
Okay. So when I approached AnyLeads, this was one of my first projects as a consultant after leaving an SEO agency that I worked for. And I'm not like a technical guy. Like I don't understand what schema is. I barely can wrap my head around canonical and redirects. I can't fix a slow page. I can just run it through is this page slow tool. I also haven't been in marketing very long. I was a sales guy up until 3 years ago. And despite all these things, I was able to create these great outcomes. And so I really do think that what we're discussing here is very accessible for anyone who thinks organic could be a great channel. It starts with creating the buyer persona. You just covered that. The next part is figuring out how people are searching across the entire funnel. And we'll use a tool like Ahrefs. And this will help us expose tens of thousands of keywords that our audience is searching for. And then we're going to use a tool like Cluster AI. And Cluster AI basically automates the keyword research process using data from Google. It examines the Google SERPs, it compares the results, and it groups keywords that can rank together. Completely abstracts SEO skills away from keyword research, and you can do world-class keyword research with no SEO skills. So after that point, then we do a cost estimator. So Cluster AI gives us the main keyword, every variation of the main keyword, and the total search volume that page can capture. And then we do a model to see, all right, is this campaign viable? What does a good outcome look like? What does a mediocre outcome look like? And what does a bad outcome look like? And assuming it passed the Sandy Chest, we go out to all the Facebook groups for nomads. There's one for every city and country around the world. And we post job ads. We find people that would be a good fit. And then we set them up for success. What I found is that writers are not just like inputs. You can't just like hire a bunch of writers and get a bunch of content. There's so much room for interpretation and implementation and bias and experience that the more work you can do around delivering them research up front and standardizing and creating guidelines and processes, the more consistently good content you'll get. So we create something that's called a content series template. Basically, it's like, all right, you're writing about SaaS metrics or you're writing about ambassador programs. Here's the top resources in the space. Here are the minimum quality standards that you need to hit. Here's how to do research for the topic. Here's the H2s we want you to use. Here's some H2s that are optional. Here's how to find more H2s. And we kind of give them a framework to create good content without having to create every outline for them.
Makes total sense. How do you judge the performance of the writers?
I'm a native English speaker. I read content. I create content. I feel like I have a pretty good idea of who's good and who's not. My editing team would probably disagree, and they'd probably say it's way more complicated than I just made it sound.
Yeah, okay. But so you have an eye, and then I guess you can, from that eye or from that idea that you have, you can make a list of criteria, and then you can pass that criteria on to other people who may need to judge writer quality in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I have a pretty extensive background, and so I just know a little about a lot, and I can tell if something sounds good. But if it's something super complex and technical, it gets a little bit more. I guess you wouldn't be a founder if you didn't know a lot about the subject. So
got it. Okay, so we defined the broader keywords. We've found cheap but good writers. We've set the writing guidelines. What happens next in this specific case study?
Then the writers go in and they start writing. And again, they don't need to know SEO. In fact, the ones that do, avoid. You want to hire the people that create the best content and just let them do their thing. They need to hit a certain amount of internal links, a certain amount of bullet points, a certain amount of lists and tables and pictures and images and H2s and stuff like that. But besides that, just focus on content quality. And then after that, you get it back and you do revisions. And depending on how you're editing team up, your editor will either do a lot of revisions. If it's someone else or if it's you, you might do less revisions and seek to work with writers that don't require such extensive feedback. But at some point in the process, things get optimized and the editors come in and they use the Cluster AI deliverable to optimize the page. So the main keyword equals the URL. If there's spaces in the main keyword, then it turns into dashes. So domain.com/main-keyword. The main keyword goes in the meta title, it goes in the meta description, and it goes in the H1. And then variations of the main keyword go across the H2s and the H3s in the content. So an example would be if the main keyword is SaaS metrics, in one of the H2s, instead of saying SaaS metrics for the 10th time, you might use a variation that's SaaS KPIs. And so you'll just simply cycle through all the variations Cluster AI found throughout the content and then do it a bunch of times. And that's literally it. That's the whole strategy, is just high velocity, high quality content.
Awesome. And there's nothing else. So after everything's optimized on the site, you leave the post and you move on to the next one.
Yeah. Our post-publishing optimization process and actually could be a lot stronger. But our approach to Google means that we never have time to circle back. Every single week and every single month, our projects are setting new all-time highs. And when we're evaluating the performance of the project, it's always in the context of the entire site and not any individual page, simply because we're potentially covering hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of opportunities.
Makes sense. For me, it seems like the real magic here in this SEO strategy that is generating such great results is the ability to get good and cheap writers. Do you think that's the most important part of this process?
I think it's one of the most important parts, yeah. If you're like the content cost for a content writer, like in Austin or Seattle, it ends up being like $500 to $700 per page. And that you just can't produce much content if that's your content costs.
And roughly, like I know that it varies, but with one of your very good and nomadic writers, are we talking like $100, $200, $300?
It'd be about $150 to $200 for 2,500 words or 3,000 words.
Awesome. This is the secret sauce, I think, for everybody listening. But now, Nick, I want to talk more specifically now about your business.
Mm-hmm.
So the first of which is how you're using this strategy or how you're using SEO to generate customers, both for the agency, but also you mentioned Cluster. How are we using this strategy to generate your own customers?
So our strategy is best servicing companies that are bigger than us. Right now, we're working